I found out why my grandpa keeps drapes over his mirrors. Growing up, my grandpa always kept drapes over the mirrors in his house. I was a kid, and he had a big house. I just assumed it was a fancy decoration. We moved before I was too old, and I kind of forgot about it. Once when I was 15, he came to visit our house, and my mom had me help cover all of the mirrors in our house. "Your grandfather has a phobia of mirrors," was all she said on the topic. I knew this was out of the ordinary now, and one night, while we were sitting in the living room together, I just blurted it out. "Why are you afraid of mirrors?" "Oh, your mother probably wouldn't want me to tell you. It's not a nice story. Let's just say they remind me of your grandmother and leave it at that." "Come on. I'm practically an adult. I can handle it." "Well, okay maybe. When your mom was just a kid, we found this mirror. My mom walked into the room and glared at him. I brought the two of you some dessert." "You're not telling her that story, are you?" "She's too young to hear all of that." She handed us some ice cream, and my grandpa didn't budge again. I tried to get him or my mom to tell me for the following year or two. Every rejection added more intrigue to the story. The story is about your grandmother leaving us. It's painful for us to talk about. My mom offered once after I had pestered her about it. I understood then why nobody wanted to talk about it, and over time, I lost the desire to hear it. I almost forgot about it, until this morning. My grandpa called me last week to tell me that he had a heart attack. He was okay and being discharged. I asked him if I could visit. This morning, I arrived to his house from the airport to find the familiar drapes drawn over the mirrors. My curiosity came back, but I couldn't ask an old man that had just had a heart attack to reminisce about the love of his life leaving him. I didn't have to ask. "I never told you the story about the mirror," he said after we had finished catching up with each other and sitting in an awkward silence. "I think now's as good a time as any. I might not have long left. They gave you a pacemaker, Grandpa. You'll be fine. I'm still 89 years old." I didn't have a reassuring response for that, so I just nodded. He started the story. We had just moved into our first real house after living in the basement apartment of my parents' house. Your mother was about 6 and really needed her own room. We bought an old house, too remote to be called the suburbs, but I didn't mind the extra commute to give the family some breathing room. We were still considering having more children, and with our own house, it seemed possible. The place was a fixer-upper, but your grandmother had a knack for it. She repainted inside and out, fixed lights, decorated, furnished the place beautifully, and even managed to fix the plumbing in one of the bathrooms on her own. There was an unfinished basement, and we got the idea in our heads to fix it up and turn it into an entertaining space. While we were preparing the space to start work and getting it inspected for asbestos, we found that one of the walls was built inside the foundation. It wasn't like a false wall, it was real, but it wasn't part of the original foundation, so we tore it down for the extra 10 foot or so of floor space. There was an antique mirror back there, one of those self-standing mirrors with a swivel covered with a sheet. The thing must have been as old as the house, maybe older. We talked about having it appraised to see if it was worth anything, but decided to keep it as a talking piece. We finished the basement and set the mirror up as a decoration. At our celebration get-together, we realized there was something strange about the mirror. The reflections were off, like a funhouse mirror. One guy would be stretched too tall, another too short, and one of your grandmother's girlfriends had no face. It was kind of creepy, but kind of funny, a defective mirror. We kept using that space for weekend gatherings. Your grandmother would cook some hors d'oeuvre, and we'd have some drinks. The mirror was always a fun little attraction. This is where it gets strange. I guess the mirror was contagious or something, because the other mirrors in the house started to play with reflections. Sometimes my hair would look fine, but when I started driving to work, I would notice it was a mess. One time, I saw two of me standing there. I got out of the house to go to work, at least. Your grandmother was constantly assaulted by the mirror. She would tell me she was obese, or that her hair was falling out, and she looked the same she always had. I tried telling her she was just as beautiful as I had ever seen her, but when your own reflection is playing tricks on you, how can you believe that? She even told me one time that the mirror had tried to grab her and pull her in. I wrote it off as crazy. Our anniversary was coming up, so I came up with a plan to help bring the magic back. I got one of the neighbor girls to watch your mother, and took your grandmother out to dinner and dancing at a new restaurant. They had floor-to-ceiling mirrors throughout the place. When your grandmother saw her reflection in those mirrors, she sobbed. I thought I had messed up, but then she kissed me. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, I haven't seen me in so long." "This is how I always see you, baby," I said back. Sorry about the romantic stuff, but that night, that was the last time we were happy. It was amazing. Like when we had first met. My grandpa was crying now. I may have been too. "Are you sure you want to keep going, Grandpa? You need to know," he said. He wiped his eyes and began again. When we got home, the sitter was a wreck. She was screaming about how she and your mother were playing hide and seek, but your mother had been hiding without being found for 3 hours. You hear these horror stories of kids locking themselves in dryers and things. We panicked and split up to search the house, calling her name. Your grandmother went to search the basement, and after I had looked through your mother's room, I went down to check on her. She was sitting in front of that antique mirror sobbing and screaming at it, "Give me back my daughter. Please, take me instead." I was walking up to her and said, "Baby, what's going on?" And she said, "She is in there, I see her, it took her, give me back my daughter." I was almost to the point I could see the reflection, when the sitter yelled down the stairs that she had found your mother in her room, hiding under the bed. I had checked under the bed, so that meant your mother had been running around actively avoiding us. I was pissed, especially seeing the state your grandmother was in over it. She was probably 10 by then, she should have known better. We both ran upstairs and gave her a hug, but I told her she was grounded for a month and should know better not to make us worry like that. She just looked at her feet and apologized. After that, your grandmother became convinced that your mother had been replaced that night. She told me that your mother had started writing with her left hand instead of her right. There was a scar on her left ankle that had switched sides too. Finally, she told me that she kept seeing our real daughter in the mirror in the basement, so she must have been replaced by something else. I talked to her about getting therapy, and she stopped talking to me about it. I thought maybe it had resolved on its own. I came home one day to your mother locked in her room while your grandmother pounded on the door with a kitchen knife in her hand. She was saying, "Give me back my daughter, you bitch." I tried to talk to her, but she lunged at me with the knife and accused me of being replaced too. I didn't know what to do, so I called 911. It killed me to do it. Your grandmother looked at me with this hurt expression, one I'll never forget, as I hung up the phone. She ran into the basement. I stood by the door to the basement until the cops showed up, but when we went downstairs, she was gone. Just vanished. There was no other way out of the basement. The cops took my statement, and eventually we settled on the idea that she hadn't run into the basement, and I had mistaken which door she used in the heat of the moment. They never found her, but I started seeing her in the mirrors. First just the one in the basement, then all throughout the house. We moved to another house and it stopped for a bit, then got worse. Even in the mirrors at work I saw her. I put these drapes up at home to get some peace. I've been doing it ever since. He stopped. My head was still catching up. Can anyone else see her? He laughed, stood up, and walked over to a curtain on the wall. You want to know if I'm just going mad? Let's see. He pulled the curtains and smiled sadly at the mirror. I couldn't see anything while seated, but I stood and froze. An elderly woman stood on the other side of the mirror, behind my grandfather's reflection. I had assumed he had PTSD or something. My mind was breaking. He pulled the curtains shut. You saw her? Not everyone can, he said. Am I going crazy? I asked. I've been asking myself that for years, sweetheart. Sometimes I think your grandmother may have been the sane one. I finished my visit with him somewhat stunned and went to check into my hotel. I am staying a few more days. Just before writing this post, my mom called me to see how my visit with Grandpa went. Talk about anything interesting? She asked. I couldn't answer. I had glanced at the mirror instinctively when she asked and saw my mother's reflection looking back at me. Hello, did I lose you? She said. Not really, just hospital stuff. Sorry, I got a text, I said, forcing myself back. After I got off the phone, I put a sheet over the mirror. Not really, just hospital stuff. Sorry, I got a text, I said, forcing myself back. After I got off the phone, I put a sheet over the mirror. Sleepover Invitations is a spooky story about group of kids and evil spirit. Have you ever tried to summon evil spirit with your friends? Please write in comments. Nina sat in her room waiting for her friends to come to her sleepover. 2 hours later, everyone had arrived. They decided to liven up the party by playing Truth or Dare. First, Amelia asked Mark, Truth or Dare? Truth, he answered. Are you in love with Nina? Asked Amelia with a sly smile. Mark blushed and replied shyly, yes. Everyone giggled and Nina blushed. Next, it was Nina's turn to ask Brandon, Truth or Dare? Dare, he replied bravely. I dare you to kiss Amelia, she said. He opened his eyes wide, took Amelia in his arms and kissed her. Now, it was Mark's turn to ask Nina, Truth or Dare? Dare, said Nina. I dare you to look into the mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times, he said. Nina was really afraid of scary things, but did not want to be seen as a wuss, so she did it. She said Bloody Mary 3 times and then slowly opened her eyes. Nothing was in the mirror. She breathed a sigh of relief. Amelia suggested they do something else and everyone agreed. Amelia opened her backpack and pulled out a Ouija board. Nina almost fainted. She had almost chickened out of doing Bloody Mary and she was afraid to tempt fate anymore. Amelia put her hands on the board and asked, What is your name? They all waited patiently for 5 minutes until it spelled out Mary. What are you doing in the house? Asked Amelia. To kill you all. Suddenly, the lights went off. Everyone heard a loud scream, and when the lights flickered on, Amelia was missing. By now, everyone was rushing to get out, but the door shut in front of them. The lights flickered off again and terrified screams were heard. When the lights came back on, Nina was all alone. She cried, asking it to stop. Then suddenly she jerked awake and was happy that it was all just a dream. Then, she looked around and saw Bloody Mary standing in the mirror. Killer Tree of the Cameroons. All that was left of the campfire was a smoldering glow deep in the wood ash, but Bob Fellows, huddled snugly in his sleeping bag beneath the old tree, didn't notice that, in the last few moments before the African dawn. Something had roused him from his sleep, and for a moment he lay there wondering what was wrong. Then he heard a rustling noise from the tree above his head, and a few moments later, a weird, gurgling moan. Thinking that there might be a leopard or some other animal about to attack, he snatched up his flashlight and rifle and turned to waken his partner, Mike Kura. That was when he saw it. Mike Kura's sleeping bag had been ripped to shreds and there wasn't a sign of him. Then something whipped through the darkness and smashed against Fellow's shoulder. The blow sent him spinning across the ground and half stunned him, but a choked scream brought him to his senses. The cry came from up among the branches of the tree, and training his flashlight on them, Fellows saw a horrifying sight. His partner's body was being slowly and powerfully crushed to death by the branches of the tree. One branch had wrapped itself around his throat and was strangling him, while several other, thicker ones were exerting such pressure on his body that Fellows could almost hear the bones splintering. Then, slowly, when the life had been squeezed out of the victim, the grotesque killer tree unraveled its branches and let Kura's body fall limply to the ground. Fellows remained where he was, too horrified and too frightened to move, as the uncannily arm-like branches groped blindly toward him. But they couldn't quite reach him. Fellows stood there until the first streaks of daylight. The tree gave a heavy, shuddering sigh, and its branches seemed to lose their life. 4 days later, in May 1903, Fellows was telling police in Oloku, in the Cameroons, that his partner had been murdered by a tree. Of course, the authorities didn't believe his story. Fellows was held on suspicion of murder, while an expedition set out to recover Kura's body. When the body was brought back to Oloku, an inquest was held, but the results of it were so startling that they were not made public for many years. Fellows was, however, freed from jail and the charge was quietly dismissed. For the doctors who carried out the post-mortem stated that Fellows could not have killed his friend, the damage had been inflicted by some powerful, superhuman creature. One doctor said that he doubted if even a gorilla would have possessed the strength to mutilate a body so severely. Shortly afterward, a missionary working in that district heard about Kura's death and wrote Oloku authorities about similar incidents. Apparently, 12 men had been found dead at the base of that tree within a period of 50 years, and for centuries the African tribesmen had treated that particular stretch of forest as taboo. The origins of the legend were based on a tribal priest about 80 years earlier, a man named Yubo, who suddenly went berserk and started a campaign of terror in the region. Many people were waylaid by him and strangled to death for no reason at all. At last the warriors set out to hunt the killer down. They trapped Yubo beneath the tree one evening during a thunderstorm. As they closed in for the kill, there was a flash of lightning. The tree was struck, and so was Yubo, who had been standing with his back to the trunk. When the tribesmen recovered his body, they found that both his hands had been sliced off at the wrists by the lightning. Yet the warriors couldn't find the missing hands anywhere. It was soon after that, according to the missionary, that the tree started to gain the reputation of being a strangler tree. But that wasn't the end of the story. Less than 6 months after the death of Mike Kura, a boy from the mission school staggered into Oloku to gasp out an incredible story to the police. The missionary had been killed by the tree right before the boy's own eyes. The boy had gone with the missionary to chop down the tree and destroy it once and for all. But they hadn't arrived there until late evening, and while the boy started a camp, the missionary approached the tree with an axe. Even before the blade hit into the tree trunk, the boy heard the missionary scream in terror. He turned just in time to see thick branches wrapping themselves around the man's body. The police inspector who went to investigate found the dead missionary hanging limply in a fork in the tree trunk. By then it was morning and the tree seemed nothing more than just a dead tree. However, the inspector and his patrol had instructions to destroy it, which they did. With a loud groan, the mighty trunk crashed to the ground. Then it was chopped and sawed into logs that were piled in a heap to be burned. Before this could happen, a strange and gruesome discovery was made. As one of the soldiers split a log, he found 2 human, skeleton hands trapped within the wood. Both hands had been severed at the wrists. Hush Little Baby is a scary story about crazy ghost of one woman. Do you believe in ghosts? Write in comments. There was once a beautiful woman. Her life was going very well. She graduated from college when she was 25. She started seeing a very handsome man right after graduation. They were very happy together and she couldn't imagine life without him. After dating for a year, the couple got married. Soon after their wedding, the woman found out she was pregnant. 9 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. The married couple loved their baby boy very much. The husband loved the baby more than anything, even his wife. She started to become jealous. The mother never got any sleep. She was always awake, taking care of the baby, in the middle of the night. She would always have to put the baby to back sleep, feed him, burp him, sing to him, calm him. She did this every single night and the strain began to show. The woman was growing to hate the baby. Her husband still loved the baby. He often ignored his wife, and when he came home from work, he just played with the baby. The wife was exhausted and overworked. She was craving attention that her husband was unwilling to give. The woman started to go off the rails. Her behavior became abusive. Sometimes, when she lost her temper, she would take her frustrations out on her own child. She would spit on the baby and refuse to feed him for days on end. She refused to change the baby's diaper as well. She would punch the baby, kick him and throw him around like a rag doll. She even tried to drown the baby, but her husband caught her before it was too late. The husband still loved the baby and tried to protect him. He would often take the baby to work with him to ensure nothing happened to him. Their relationship was beyond repair and the couple was slowly drifting apart. One Sunday, everything seemed fine. The wife just sat there, not saying a word. The husband played with the baby. That night, everything was peaceful. The husband decided to stay home with the baby and the house was quiet. The baby started crying in the middle of the night. The wife got up and walked into the baby's room. She picked up the baby from its crib. She pulled a knife out of her dressing gown and began singing a lullaby. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Mama has got a sharpened knife. As I sing every little note, I get closer to slitting your throat. Hush, little baby, close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, and then you die." The husband woke up in the morning and checked on the baby. What he saw horrified him. The baby was dead. Its throat had been slit from ear to ear and the crib was soaked in blood. The husband sat there in stunned silence. He couldn't move. He couldn't say a word. He sat there all day, staring at his dead baby. He couldn't eat or sleep. He just gazed at the baby's cold, motionless body all day. Finally, the man got up and went downstairs. His wife was making dinner in the kitchen. She was stirring a pot of boiling water and acting like nothing had happened. The man snuck up behind her, grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head into the boiling water. He held her head there, seething with anger, as she struggled. Then, he whipped her head back and broke her neck. After that, he slit his own wrists and killed himself. Months later, a new couple moved into the house. They had a beautiful baby girl. One night, the wife woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. She still had the lights off and was staring in the mirror. She saw her own reflection in the mirror, rocking the baby. She had a blood-soaked dress. Her reflection slowly turned to look at her. She saw her misshapen face, a grin slowly spreading across it. She raised the knife and brought it to the baby's throat. All the woman could hear was the baby crying. Her reflection slit the baby's throat. Then, there was silence. The worried mother rushed into the baby's room. The walls were dripping with blood. There, standing before her, was the woman. She handed her the dead baby. The wife was crying. The woman lifted the knife. "Hush, little baby," she whispered.